It's time to piss off everyone again with this anime that I love. Please, everyone, watch Dungeon Meshi. It's on Netflix. It's really good. So today we will watch the insane world building of Dungeon Meshi. Because behind the story that is told, the world building is super interesting. And most of the time when I'm watching, I pause and be like, wow, like they give the lore of this particular stuff, even if you don't need it. And this is what I call like the good writing. I should read this, by the way. Okay, let's go.
When you think of a perfectly crafted world in fiction, what comes to mind? Does your world
Berserk.
need to have a map with unique and fantastical geography? How about well thought out languages and cultures? Or perhaps are you more interested in power scaling or politics? These are all aspects of world building that artists and writers keep in mind when trying to create their own immersive universes. And as a recently born-again fantasy anime enjoyer, I found myself reinvigorated by the creativity and unique charm manga and anime creators put into the formation of their own individual worlds. But at the pinnacle of these beautifully crafted fantasy worlds, there's one series in particular that stands above all else in my humble opinion. And that's a story about a human, an elf, a dwarf, and a halfling? Wait, are we not still talking about free run? Not quite. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Delicious in Dungeon or Dungeon Meshi. And I want to talk about everything that makes the world building of Dungeon Meshi so next level. But before we get into any of that, let's just set the scene as to what kind of world we're working with here. Dungeon Meshi takes place on an island, very creatively referred to as the island, off the coast of Kakabrud, a
The island. and I never thought of it.
larger continent. On this island, there's a
They have a new episode each Thursday, and you know one of the cute, not the cute, but when I finish my Thursday stream, like after I finish, they release a new episode. So I go like to bed super tired, and I'm like, yes, I will watch a new episode, and I'm super happy. And I watch also an episode of Keijo number 8, which is also good. You should watch it. You know what? We will talk about more anime often since I am an anime guy.
civilization mostly run by tall men, which is the name for regular humans in the Dungeon Meshi universe, but it's also inhabited by half-foots, dwarves, gnomes, elves, and even orcs underground. Now on this island, there exists a recently discovered dungeon filled with monsters and treasure, but most importantly the promise of becoming the new king of the dungeon for any adventurer who can defeat a mad sorcerer that's rumored to skulk about on the lower levels. Most people though enter the dungeon in search of gold and riches to bring back to the surface and
They also made something I really love in the anime. They gave an explanation about why if you die inside the dungeon, you can come back to life. And while doing this, it gave like more potential to the series since like now someone can die and go back to life, but it have consequences.
sell for a premium. Now over the 6 years since the dungeon's discovery, most of the valuable items have been picked clean from the top 3 layers, but for more adventurous dungeon goers, there's still much to be discovered about the lower levels. And that's where we start off, with the protagonist Laios and his party being wiped out on the 6th floor of the dungeon in a fight against a red dragon. This world we start off with from the beginning is pretty straightforward and allows you to fill in a lot of the blanks yourself.
Yes, I also love this about the animes that they don't showcase every single detail. A lot of time they just give you the informations and you connect the dots by yourself, and they don't lose time in unnecessary things.
This is a dungeon crawling fantasy world with Dungeons and Dragons inspired races, classes, and monsters. And while it's clearly well done from the beginning, the world of Dungeon Meshi doesn't seem all that distinguishable from its fantasy anime contemporaries. However,
The only like difference is that they eat what they kill.
that's completely fine, seeing as the characters and interesting concept of cooking nutritious food out of monsters more than makes up for what is seemingly a run-of-the-mill fantasy universe. Now the key word I want you guys to focus on in that last statement was seemingly, because it doesn't take long for shit to get bananas in the Dungeon Meshi universe, with a burgeoning of lore, politics, and world expansion that would put the Cambrian explosion to shame.
Nah, I would eat it.
Not to mention a cast of characters filled with so much individuality and charisma that you can't can't help but fall in love with every single one of them for one reason or another. And to understand all of the world building elements in Dungeon Meshi, I believe it's important to first take a look at the genius mind behind the story and art herself, Ryoko Kui. It's clear from Kui-sensei's original collection of one-shots from early in her career called The Dragon School is on Top of the Mountain, and her personal blog she uploads frequently to, she's a lover of all things fantasy and has been for a very long time. Whether it's Tolkien-inspired
And her art style is like really, really cute.
high fantasy, or a more Eastern approach rooted in Japanese folklore, Kui-sensei has clearly developed a keen awareness of what makes the fantasy genre tick. And that leads me into the first aspect of Dungeon Meshi's world building I want to talk about, Ryoko Kui's incredibly charming take at the quintessential fantasy classes and races we all know and love. Sure, the inclusion of the likes of elves, dwarves,
By the way, that was the sorcerer they need to kill in order to be the owner of the dungeon.
halflings, and orcs has been done ad nauseum in the fantasy genre, but in the Dungeon Meshi universe, these types of peoples have new cultural and design quirks that are so unique to Kui-sensei's humors that they've become an entirely new entity in and of themselves. Take for example kobolds, a race of demi-humans from Germanic folklore commonly depicted as dragon-like in entities such as Dungeons and Dragons. But in the Dungeon Meshi universe, they're a diverse race of dog people living in a faraway desert. Now to be fair,
And that dog is so cute. Stop giving me Pokemon.
early kobold designs in Dungeons and Dragons were actually dog-like people as well, but in the eyes of Kui-sensei, they're depicted as different breeds of wild and domestic dogs with personalities that match their breed, giving them a familiar and almost silly charm. And rather than their zombie-like appearance they bared in the Lord of the Rings movies, orcs in the Dungeon Meshi universe have fur-covered skin and resemble different types of pigs and boars to a similar effect. But it's not just the demi-human races, all of the other classic fantasy races, including regular humans, have something fun and unique about them through the eyes of Kui-sensei. Elven men are almost indistinguishable from elven women, halflings mature at about twice the rate of regular humans but forever look like children,
Yeah, the difference between elves, women, and men is the underwear.
dwarves are built with so much muscle yet such little body fat that they tire out quickly, and gnomes consider the classic garden gnome outfit formal or ceremonial clothes. As for regular humans, though they don't stand out that much comparatively, there's still plenty of cultural influence to keep them interesting and unique, such as the Asian influence over the Eastern peoples, and the fact that regular humans tend to excel at song and dance more so than other races. Now, I'm certain a lot of people watching this are wondering where I'm pulling all of this information about the Dungeon Meshi races from, seeing as there's a decent amount of this information that hasn't been covered in the anime or manga. And the answer to that lies in Kui-sensei's unyielding efforts to continue to flesh out the Dungeon Meshi universe with art and side story collections like the Dungeon Meshi Adventurers.
And the story is like really good with her art style. If it was like a different art style, it would not be maybe as lovely. So I love that mixed.
Bible, and Daydream Hour. In these books, Kui-sensei includes character info and world lore that she couldn't fit into the main story of Dungeon Meshi, as well as extra art and comments on the process of writing the manga. There are also sections at the end of each volume of Dungeon Meshi dedicated to exploring the life and biology of monsters called Monster Tidbits. The way Ryoko Kui has written such a charming fantasy story with an interesting universe that she continues to flesh out reminds me a lot of J.R.R. Tolkien's approach at world building in the Lord of the Rings universe, which he continued to add to for years via unfinished stories, afterwords, and letters to his son. In the same way Tolkien would go back and say, "Oh yeah, Elf King from The Hobbit is actually Legolas's father and his name is Thranduil," Kui would go back and say, "By the way, Chilchuck is actually tall and slim for a halfling, and he was originally supposed to have slightly graying hair because he's middle-aged for his race."
Yeah, he's like middle age, and everyone is thinking that he's like a kid or something.
And for some reason, he has a thing for blonde chicks. None of this information is all that important for the main story, but the fact that it's all there for us to find if we want to dig deep enough shows the true depth of thought Kui put into her world. And it's with this depth of thought that I want to spring us into the next section of Dungeon Meshi's world building. The politics of the surface. Now, going into Dungeon Meshi, you wouldn't really pin it to be the type of series that would involve much overworld politics, seeing as it starts off as a show about Laios and his companions cooking monsters on a journey into a dungeon to save his sister. And though
No, like the real story is they were like in the sixth floor. His sister was eaten by the dragon, and as I said, in if you die inside the dungeon, they can bring you back to life because I will not explain why, but there is a good reason why. But if you die outside the dungeon, you are dead, like forever. So they wanted to go back quickly to get back the sister before get like digested by the dragon because dragons don't digest quickly. The problem is because they are adventurers, they need to go back in and they need to pay like people to go with them, but they are super broke, like really poor. So no one wanted to go back with them, and two of their members left. So they were like, you know what? Instead of going outside to buy food and going back, let's eat whatever we kill. And they met with the guy that like to cook and know a lot about how to cook monsters, and they team up to go to beat the dragon and save the sister. This is like the main plot.
Dialogue between characters like Chilchuck and Marcille, it isn't until around episode 10 when Mr. Tance is speaking with the governor of the island that we get our first real glimpse at what the politics of their world looks like. And it seemingly all boils down to the disparity in lifespans between those of the elves, dwarves, and gnomes, and that of humans, halflings, and other such races. The long-lived races, but most notably the elves, treat the short-lived races like children.
I love how they took the why they did him dirty.
Children that need to be monitored and not taken seriously. And all throughout history in the Dungeon Meshi universe, the long-lived races have taken the lands they believe to be the most fertile or profitable, leaving the less desirable lands to the short-lived races. Take, for example, the island. As revealed in the conversation between Mr. Tance and the governor, this was land gifted to the tall men from the Elven King because they didn't think they could do anything with it. But it was only upon the discovery of the dungeon that the elves started taking an interest, even requesting that authority of the dungeon be
Yeah, that made me angry. That like gave you humans the island that when they saw there is a dungeon in, they were like, maybe we will take it back. No, fuck off. It's mine now.
turned over to them. And as the dungeon grows unstable due to Laios' party drawing the ire of the lunatic magician, the elves claim that short-lived races lack the wisdom to handle the dungeon, sending the Canaries to take control over the situation as a result. This obviously creates a lot of hostility between the short and long-lived races, but being real, it's mostly just the elves that fuck it up for everyone. In episode 15, Chilchuck mentions that historically half-foots were kidnapped by elves for having an involvement with ancient magical artifacts, indicating that the elves in the Dungeon Mesh universe act as some kind of world police for anything involving magic. And any involvement with ancient magic in particular
Yeah, and they will fuck up really hard with magic inside. I didn't read the mangas. I don't know if it will have consequences, but they will fuck up.
is considered a great crime and must be handled by the elves, further indicating that they know something about ancient magic but condescendingly refuse to share this information with the other races because they don't deem them responsible enough. Though the dwarves don't seem to be seen as antagonistic towards the short-lived races like the elves, as stated by Daya in episode 14, the islanders don't have a very good impression of them because Namari's father was embezzling money when he was the chief arms dealer. It's kind of insane that we can draw this much information about what the politics of the Dungeon Mesh universe are like from these few offhanded comments from characters throughout the series. Now, the next big aspect of world building I want to talk about is slightly hinted at in the anime and manga, but isn't really clarified outside of Kui's Guide to the Dungeon Mesh Universe, the Adventurer's Bible, and that's the unique and well thought out magic system. If you remember from episode 15 when Marcille was trying to teach Laios magic, she mentions that there's a difference between the gnomish magic system Fallen uses and the elvish magic system she uses. And similarly later on, it's mentioned that the Eastern magic used by Maizuru is also closely related to gnomish magic. And though it's not quite as in-depth as Gege Akutami explaining exactly
Gege is in another level.
how Satoru Gojo's curse technique works, Ryoko Kui actually does clarify the key differences between elvish and gnomish magic. And it all comes down to spirits. In the Dungeon Meshi universe, the ability to use magic comes from a spellcaster's ability to interact with spirits and call upon them. In the gnomish magic system, the spirits are politely asked to generate a phenomenon resulting in a less precise yet potentially powerful result. Whereas in the elvish magic system, the spirits are instructed to do something specifically to the caster's parameters, resulting in the same outcome every time, but is limited to the spellcaster's ability to instruct. A great example of elvish and gnomish
So if like caster don't have a lot of imaginations or don't have like a lot of how to say, yeah, I can't think about something creative, it will not be as good as like the Gnobish one.
Magic in action is Marseille's use of magic to create explosions and flashes versus Holmes' usage of an Undine as a companion to assist in battle. Now, the usage of magic in the Dungeon Mesh universe doesn't come without a cost, and though races like elves and gnomes have a higher resistance to it, newer spellcasters can get something called mana sickness if they're not accustomed to the use of magic, like Laios in episode 15 after healing Marseille. And if a spellcaster uses too many spells in quick succession, they could end up depleting their mana, leaving them in an anemic state like the one Marseille was in after her fight with the Undine. While it's not the most in-depth power structure on the planet, it at least explains things in a way that's clear and makes sense. Which leads me into my next point. More than just the magic system, everything in Dungeon Meshi is satisfyingly explainable. From the biology of how red dragons breathe fire to Laios' silly methods of defeating monsters, everything has a believable reason as to how it works.
This is one of the best scenes the anime have. I love how wait, you can see here. You have like it's his beard, but it looked like some chest hair on his frog outfit.
Take for example the living armor from episode 3. Though Senshi mentions that armor isn't edible and can't be cooked, it's later revealed that the living armor is actually a colony of land-dwelling mollusks similar to the likes of clams and mussels that evolved hard shells resembling a knight's armor to protect themselves. Which is an incredibly satisfying revelation because not only does this mean that living armor
Yeah, and the first thing he was thinking about is eating them. Every time he look like he meet like a new monster, the first thing is like, are you delicious?
could actually be cooked and eaten, but it also provides an entertaining explanation for their behavior. And then there was Laios' absolutely ridiculous methods of taking down the basilisk in episode 2, and how he saved himself and Chilchuck from the mermaids by singing along with them in episode 7. Which, sure, it makes sense that those would work, but it makes even more sense that a monster fanatic like Laios would know all of these niche methods for defeating monsters in the first place. Characters like Laios and Senshi, who are both endless wells of information, are like walking means of world building in Dungeon Meshi. Senshi's vast knowledge of the dungeon's ecosystems combined with Laios' adoration for all things monsters has created the perfect tag team to give in-depth explanations about their party's journey every step of the way.
Yeah, and their party is like regretting each time that these two have to come up with an idea or something. Be- because they are like, okay, we are safe, and they're like, okay, let's try to cook this one.
Now, up until this current moment, every element of world building we've talked about in Dungeon Meshi has been the baseline rules of the universe that Kui-sensei has laid out for us. But now I want to turn your attention to arguably the most vital aspect of Dungeon Meshi's world building yet, the storytelling. How is it possible that a series that takes place almost entirely inside a dungeon has world building that rivals that of some of the greatest fantasy writers of all time? The answer to this question lies within Kui-sensei's ability to strategically reveal information and lore through dialogue and other small details. And that brings us to one of the most brilliant episodes in the Dungeon Meshi anime thus far, episode 14. When Kabru and his party were conversing over their meal, we got hit with our first real look at what Laios' party was like before Fallen got swallowed by the Red Dragon. And keep in mind, just a few episodes earlier, it was mentioned that rumors and gossip spread like wildfire amongst the adventurers of the island. So while there's a decent amount of truth in their information, we also can't be sure just how much was embellished. But it was through this dialogue that we learned about how Namari's father was a disgraced arms dealer, Chilchuck tries to broker deals on behalf of the island's half-foots, and that Laios was easily taken advantage of by his former party members. And this is where I got hit with my first sense of, oh, I guess I don't actually know all that much about these characters we've been following. Another brilliant episode for world building was episode 6, which featured a section of
Oh yes, that episode like put some more foreshadowing, and I found it suspicious. Then like few episodes later, when I connected the dots, I was like, holy fuck, that's amazing.
Laios diving into living paintings depicting the life and rise to power of a man named King Durgal. In these paintings, a reoccurring character is a sketchy-looking elf boy who eventually catches on to Laios' disruption of these memories. But it wasn't until 7 episodes later that we realized the importance of the memories within these living paintings with the reveal that this elf boy was actually Thistle, the the lunatic magician, and he seemingly lost contact with the king of the dungeon, Durgal, based off of his tireless efforts to search for him, even turning Fallen into a dragon herself to
Oh
assist in
shit.
his search.
What
Not
was
only
now?
does
It's
this
spoiler.
massive revelation clarify an interesting detail from earlier in the story, but it also implies that there's much more to this dungeon's lore than we were originally led to believe. Which leads me to one of the best examples of Kui-sensei's storytelling in Dungeon Meshi, Fallen Toden. A user on Twitter by the name of Dev put her character into perspective perfectly. Fallen is such an interesting character because she's the only one we learn about through all the other characters and never directly. She spends so much of the story as a
Yeah, because in the beginning they will like be talking about her and how like she's amazing, strong in magic, etc. And we never interacted with her directly. So later I will not spoil everything, but like we know a lot about her, not from watching her on screen, just like people talking about her. So when you meet her directly later, you discover new stuff.
carrot on a stick to get the party to descend into the dungeon, but it's only when Marcial reminisces on the gentle nature of her spellcasting, or Shuro talks about what he loved so much about her, that we truly see her character come to life. And not only does she come to life, we kind of fall in love with her ourselves, seeing how her kindness and selfless nature justifies the lengths Laios' party goes to in order to save her. To be honest, as a manga reader, there's so much more I could talk about when it comes to Dungeon Meshi's world building, but I wanted to try to keep this video as story spoiler free as possible for anime only watchers to enjoy as well. But I hope with what I've been able to say so far, this video has helped highlight just how enchanting and comprehensive the world of Dungeon Meshi truly is. And no matter how vast this universe expands, it will always hold on to this one true core value. If you improve your diet, get plenty of sleep, and engage in proper exercise, you'll become strong enough to handle anything.
Yeah,
Thank you for watching.
as long as you know what you are eating and how to cook them, because otherwise you will be intoxicated and die. Anyway, that was it for Dungeon Meshi. You should watch it. You should watch it. You will not regret spending your time on this anime. It's like a really good one. Only sad part is that since it's on Netflix, like they didn't put a lot of marketing on it, and in few months everyone will be like hyped by it. But try to watch it from now to be one of the few first people that will watch it before it get hyped.